Hello and welcome everyone. Happy Pride Month. Yay! I discovered something fun today when I started waving my little flag around. Bob likes flag. You want to say hi, Bob? You say hi, Bob? Say hello. Hello, everyone. Happy Pride. Hello. Welcome, Lobsel, Adrian, Johan, Billy, Zool, Bob. Okay, go back down. Go back down. Welcome to a new video series we will be doing this month called God Loves Gays, because I couldn't think of a better title, and everybody seemed to think that was funny and entertaining, so that's what we will be calling it. It's going to be an exploration of the history of Western thought, specifically Christian thought, since they both are very closely tied together. and how that history has developed into our modern sense of what it is to have a sexuality and a gender, and how that has influenced people taking their religious faith and using that faith to inform how they interact with other people, how they feel about themselves. Hopefully it'll give you a more nuanced understanding of the faith. If it is your faith, maybe you will feel more comfortable in claiming it. If it's not yours, maybe you'll understand better how it affects other people. Today we want to actually be talking about it, because we first have to set up the world that this baby faith will be born into, and that is the world of the Roman Empire. Hello, folks popping in. Pop rocks. Bob did, in fact, say trans rights. Hello, Todd. Happy Pride. Hello, Marianor. That's so funny that you say Westboro Baptist misheard Jesus. He said he hates figs. That's biblically true. Yes, he did curse a fig tree. But anyway, we will get to all of that. It's going to be a very long series. I have about 8 episodes planned out so far, where we're going to spend some time diving into some actual firsthand texts, looking at some imagery, kind of trying to figure out, where all this history came from, as well as giving you examples of real world queer people in the past. Of course, we have to realize, as modern people, it's not a one-to-one relationship where you can look back and say, oh, well, clearly that was a gay. Because sexuality and gender and the understanding of it has changed over time, and not every society had an idea of sexualities. Rome did, but not everyone did. But when I look back at history, what I try to keep in mind when it comes to claiming people historically, because there's a lot of controversy about this in various fields of queer study. Who can we claim if we can't really say that they would have seen themselves as gay or bisexual or transgender? The way that I look at it is, if I were to place myself back into that historical period, into that context, if my life would have mirrored this person, if my experiences feel similar to this person, I think it's entirely fair to then claim them for a queer reading. If the way that their lives were lived in any way mirrors how we live in our society today, as a minority, as a sexual diversity, something different from the norm, I think that's fair to say those people were queer. Maybe not homosexual, maybe not lesbian, but queer. Now, to get to the Roman world, here is our lovely map. Most of us probably know of and have heard of the Roman Empire, since they're a major facet of Western history and the Bible. This is an actual image of what the Roman world was like in Jesus' time. Included France, Italy, Spain, a lot of North Africa, most of Egypt. That doesn't look like most of Egypt, but consider where the people lived. It kind of covered a great deal of Egypt and the area around the Nile, parts of the Middle East, and what is known in the biblical time as the province of Judea, which would be modern-day Palestine, and the home of all the various events of the Christian Bible, and the homeland of the Jews. Hello, Daniel. Welcome. Hello, Alexis, and other folks. Hello, hello. So this world encompassed a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures. When they took over Greece, they actually took over a lot of their religions, but it wasn't just Greek religion that's been taken over. Rome is a melting pot that absorbs a lot of religions and a lot of traditions. There's very little that you aren't allowed to do so long as you continue to worship the big guy at the top, Mr. Emperor himself. In the Roman world, the emperor is a deity on earth. He is the front man of the gods. He is kind of a god himself, a godly man, I guess is a way to put it. But as part of Roman citizenship, or as Roman just living in Rome, in the Roman Empire, you have to worship his genius. The term did not mean what it means today, but the genius, you have to worship the genius of the emperor. As long as you do that, for the most part, a lot of religions lived side by side. Judaism was a special exception, because in Jewish tradition, you can worship no god but God, and all that jazz. The Jews did not follow along with a lot of Roman tradition. Luckily for them, at this well, not really luckily, for a certain benefit, because the Jews had been around for so long and were kind of seen to have like a history to them, they had some modicum of freedom in the Roman Empire. They were not required to worship the emperor. They were not required to join the military. They got some leniency because they were old, because they had some history. When we eventually get to discussing the Jews and the Christians of the time, you'll see that a major issue with the Christians was the fact that they were new. They were babies. They were brand new religion, and the Romans were like, well, clearly you do not have any tenure here. But anyway, an important aspect of Roman tradition that we have to understand is their idea of the social hierarchy. Their whole culture is built around ideas of what a person is valued at and what they are allowed to do, or what is socially acceptable for them based on their value as a person. Not all people are created equal. You can change your position in society, but there's always going to be somebody at the bottom of the ladder, no matter what. There were people who were free, people who were slaves, people who were freedmen, which meant you were formerly a slave but were no longer one. You could be a citizen of Rome or a non-citizen of Rome. A woman, because women were their own special kind of class. There could be female slaves, but female slaves would never be considered women. And then your religion was also something that would determine what kind of person you were in the society. So, like, a free Jew, a free female Jew living in Rome would have a very different experience than, like, a male slave in Rome. Your legality changed based on what you were. For instance, slaves were not considered people, really. You could punish them corporally, you could torture them, exploit them sexually, you could execute them. They could not be legally married, and they could not legally own property. So really, they were at the whims of the cosmos. They did not have a lot of freedom. You could earn your freedom, but, you know, for every slave that became a freedman, there were like 12 slaves left. At any point in history, anywhere from like a fifth to 3/4 of Roman society was slaves. And their idea of slavery wasn't based on religion or culture or skin color. Most of them came from war. I mean, they conquered frickin' half of Europe and Africa, and whoever they conquered, they took people from those cultures and made them slaves. And then from then on, you know, those people were having children, and those children would be born as slaves, and so then you have this system of slavery built in. Citizens versus non-citizens, you had a few different rights based on whether or not you were considered a Roman citizen, like voting and stuff like that. Not anywhere near as bad as like being a slave. Women, as compared to a decent amount of society at this time in Roman history, women didn't have it too bad. They were subject to their husbands and to male family members, but in this particular era, they were not as subject. In fact, they were the kind of legal social property of their fathers until their fathers died, and then they were free, married or not. Their husbands did not have the same legal control over them that their fathers did. So there was a certain amount of freedom that women could have at this time. They could divorce, they could own property, they could participate in business. So it wasn't as bad for them here as it was in other places. They were still considered socially lesser, but we will get to why that is in a bit. It wasn't necessarily because of their gender, but we will get there. All right. So, what religions were being practiced in Rome at the time? It was very much a pantheist religion, and it was one that absorbed a lot of other religions at the time, a lot of other people's gods. I mean, basically the entire pantheon was formerly Greek, and they just kind of just ate it. There were also Egyptian gods thrown in there, some some gods from further east in the Middle East, a lot of them just thrown together and put into the same kind of system. It was a religion of ritual and sacrifice. This is not like, you're not going to find like a holy Bible. You're not going to find going, to church to listen to the word spoken. Like, this is not that. This is a tradition very heavily focused on festivals, on sacrificing animals, on banquets. It's kind of like a party religion in a certain extent, where you are doing something to honor God, to honor the gods, whichever god is your favorite, or whoever. You burn things, you dance, you participate in a festival, you do something. It's not so much focused on like morality or reading or study. that is more the field of philosophy. There's a very big separation in the Roman and earlier Greek world between like moral thought and philosophical thought and religious thought. They aren't the same, which is something that you will see in Judaism and Christianity, where morality and God have a lot to do with each other. They don't in Rome. Of course, you have to worship the emperor. And because of that, religion was very political. Saying, you know, I don't want to worship the gods is the same as saying F you to the emperor. It's a political statement. And so worshiping having this religious power over all of society, whether or not it's various different gods, it definitely reinforces the political system of the time. And so saying, you know, taking a stance against the Roman religion was taking a stance against Roman politics and the Roman Empire and the emperor, which is gonna get some people in trouble later, as you can probably imagine. Now, what is the concept of God, the idea of God? As we'll see with Jews and with Christians, it's a very personal relationship between a person and a God that kind of acts as a person, that has, like, they speak, they have anger and emotions and thoughts and feelings and desires for you and a personal relationship with you. The Romans don't have that. The gods in Roman tradition are powers. They are natural forces, the embodiments of the wind and the earth and the water, things that cannot be controlled. We can only hope that by our sacrifices and our rituals that things will go well for us, because you can't control the weather. And so it was kind of a way of trying to take power and feel like you can have some kind of say in the natural world, even though looking around at it, you know it's so out of your control. Kind of like standing before the awe of an earthquake or a wildfire and just praying and hoping, please let this go well for me. You know, if I do the right rituals, if I perform the right honors, maybe things will go well for me. So it wasn't a personal god. There was not this real sense of like having a relationship with Zeus, unless it was in the pants, you know. A lot of the stories and the things being told about the gods, they were like major features of plays and poetry and folktales, like in a sense of, you know, explaining the world around them. A lot of these stories would explain the existence of specific rivers and the way they entertained, because everybody wants to be entertained. Now, a consequence of this idea of the gods as powers we can't control is the idea that there are certain actions we can't control. That not just the natural world is out of our control, but if we imagine certain emotional and mental states as natural powers, well, then we can't control those either. If Eros, the god of sex and desire, is a natural force in the world that can't be controlled, well then surely when I'm feeling desire, it's out of my control. Wish this would remain online later. Oh, don't worry, it will. I did say that these videos will be moved to a second channel later, but that'll be a while. You'll have time. And you can always follow the second channel. It's in the description. As well as all the documents for this episode are in the description. We're about to read one, but we're going to read about Eros. What I'm explaining is, there were some times where the gods were used basically to explain why some people didn't have self-control, you know? Because this was a society, as we'll explain soon, that didn't put a lot of honor on control. Like, it was cool, like, if you wanted it, take it, you know? Sexually, war, you know, just, it was cool to just kind of take what you want, because hey, who can control those impulses? To explain, or to go into more detail about one story that discusses Eros, we're going to read a section of Plato's Symposium, which is linked in the description. Plato was a very famous philosopher, poet, writer. You've probably heard of him. He wrote tons of stuff throughout his life. The Symposium is one of his lesser, well, not really lesser known, but most people have heard of the Republic, where he writes about like what the ideal society would be. This is not that. This is a bunch of dudes who were out all night drunk, basically, talking about sex and love, and like their ideas of sex and love and what is best and what's, just a lot of different stories relating to Eros. And what you find in Plato's work is multiple discussions of sexuality that involves homosexual love and even lesbian love, which is not as common here. We'll discuss why soon. But more specifically, a piece of the symposium involves a famous historical figure called Aristophanes. He was a comedy writer. He was a historical figure of the time, and Plato uses him as a fictional character. All the characters in his story are famous Romans, and they're all chatting after they got drunk about love. Aristophanes tells a story that explains, supposedly in his mind, where people came from. So this is an excerpt from Plato's Symposium. Aristophanes professed to open another vein of discourse. He had a mind to praise love in another way, unlike that of either Pausanias or Eryximachus. I practiced this word. Eryximachus. Mankind, he said, judging by their neglect of him, have never, as I think, at all understood the power of love. For if they had understood him, they would surely have built noble temples and altars, and offered solemn sacrifices in his honor. But this is not done, and most certainly ought to be done, since of all the gods he is the best friend of men, the helper and the healer of the ills which are the great impediment to the happiness of the race. I will try to describe his power to you, and you shall teach the rest of the world what I am teaching you. In the first place, let me treat of the nature of man, and what has happened to it. For the original human nature was not like the present, but different. The sexes were not two, as they are now, but originally three in number. There was man, woman, and the union of the two, having a name corresponding to this double nature, which had once a real existence, but is now lost. And the word androgynous is only preserved as a term of reproach. In the second place, the primeval man was round, his back and sides forming a circle, and he had 4 hands and 4 feet, 1 head and 2 faces, looking opposite ways, set on a round neck and precisely alike, also 4 ears, 2 privy members, and the remainder to correspond. He could walk upright as men now do, backwards or forwards as he pleased, and he could also roll over and over at a great pace, turning on his 4 hands and 4 feet, 8 in all, like tumblers going over and over with their legs in the air. This was when he wanted to run fast. Now the sexes were 3, and such as I have described them, because the sun, moon, and earth are 3, and the man was originally the child of the sun, the woman of the earth, and the man-woman of the moon, which is made up of sun and earth. And they were all round and moved round and round like their parents. Terrible was their might and strength, and the thoughts of their hearts were great, and they made an attack upon the gods. Of them is told the tale of Otis and Iphialtes, who, as Homer says, dared to scale heaven, and would have laid hands upon the gods. Doubt reigned in the celestial councils. Should they kill them and annihilate the race with thunderbolts, as they had done the giants? But then there would be an end of the sacrifices and worship which men offered to them. But on the other hand, the gods could not suffer their insolence to be unrestrained. At last, after a good deal of reflection, Zeus discovered a way. He said, "Methinks I have a plan which will humble their pride and improve their manners. Men shall continue to exist, but I will cut them in 2, and then they will be diminished in strength and increased in numbers. This will have the advantage of making them more profitable to us. They shall walk upright on 2 legs, and if they continue insolent and will not be quiet, I will split them again, and they shall have to hop about on a single leg." He spoke and cut men in 2, like a sorb apple which is halved for pickling, or as you might divide an egg with a hair. And as he cut them one after another, he bade Apollo give the face and the half of the neck a turn, in order that the man might contemplate the section of himself. He would thus learn a lesson of humility. Apollo was bidden to heal their wounds and compose their forms. So he gave a turn to the face and pulled the skin from the sides all over with that in our language is called the belly, like the purses which draw in, and he made one mouth at the center, which he fastened in a knot, with the same which is called the navel. He molded the breast and took out most of the wrinkles, much as a shoemaker might have smoothed leather upon a last. He left a few, however, in the region of the belly and navel, as a memorial to the primeval state. After the division of two parts of man, each desiring his other half, came together and throwing their arms about one another, entwined in mutual embraces, belonging to grow into one. They were on the point of dying from hunger and self-neglect, because they did not like to do anything apart. And when one of the halves died and the other survived, the survivors sought another mate, man or woman as we call them, being the sections of entire men or women, and clung to that. They were being destroyed, when Zeus, in pity, invented a new plan. He turned the parts of generation round to the front, for this had not always been their position, and they sowed the seed no longer as hitherto, like a grasshopper in the ground, but in one another. And after the transposition of the male generated in the female, in order that by the mutual embraces of man and woman they might breed, and the race might continue. Or if the man came to man, they might be satisfied and rest and go on their ways. So the ancient is the desire of one another which is planted in us, and go their ways to the... Wait, I missed a line. Reuniting our original nature, making one of two, and healing the state of man. There it goes further here. Do I want to read the whole section? Men who are a section of that double nature, which was what's once called androgynous, are lovers of women. Adulterers are generally of this breed, and also adulterous women who lust after men. The women who are a section of women do not care for men, but have female attachments. The female companions are of this sort. But they who are of a section of men follow the male, and while they are young, being slices of original men, they hang about men and embrace them, and they are the best of boys and youths, because they have the most manly nature. So if you'll listen to what that says, it's a story completely invented by Plato, but influenced by the culture of the time. He's inventing an explanation for why certain people have certain sexual desires. Originally, we were all two people fused into one. Men and men were fused together. Women and women were fused together. Women and men were fused together. And we were so powerful, we tried to fight the gods. And so Zeus said, no, and split us all. And ever since, we've all been searching for our other half. Men who were fused together are looking for other men. Women who were fused together are looking for other women. And women and men who were fused together are looking for women and men, and apparently they're the most adulterous, which I think is funny, which I'm sure the association with adultery comes from the fact that legally most adultery had to do with married women rather than women and women or men and men. We will get to that. But it's not a myth. It's not an adaptation of something that existed in their religion, but it's an explanation that fits with the social worldview of the times. And it seems in general, pretty sympathetic to sexualities for the most part. Unfortunately, Plato kind of switches that sympathy in the last book of his life, called The Laws. It was written after he had tried to get his ideas going in this one area, and with a political leader. He failed. He spent time in jail. He was super old and kind of sickly, and he never finished this book. And for a lot of people that study him and research him, it comes across as the weakest of his works, and possibly even out of place with a lot of his older ideas, because he contradicts himself. So I think The Laws, and the fact that The Laws, he kind of comes down on sexualities that are against the norm as being kind of gross, doesn't really reflect how he felt most of his life, and may even reflect a general sense for Roman elders, where they are suddenly feeling far more, I guess, judgmental of sexuality because they are now past their prime. Who knows? Thank you, Daniel. That's quite sweet. And thank you all for joining us if I miss saying hello. So, let's discuss the legal practices of Rome, because these are going to have a major influence on our discussions of Judaism and Christianity, because they have developed, in the case of Judaism, their own ideas about what is appropriate. And many of those ideas will be influenced by what Rome thought was appropriate. So, marriage in Rome was a social and economic relationship. It was a business partnership. This guy, their family, has boats, and your family's merchants, and they need boats. Well, let's marry our children, and now we both get deals on boats. It was very much not a thing about love and sex, per se, though of course you were expected to have kids. You weren't necessarily expected to be in love with each other. It was business. It was completely normal for the husband to have extramarital sexual encounters. What he was allowed to do was very specific. Prostitutes, slaves, unattached women, unattached men, as long as it was not a married woman or the daughter of someone that would have, been upset by it and complained, he was probably cool. Your social status was heavily tied to your marriage and your children because obviously those marriages brought you power and money. You even could get rewards for how many children you had. If you got 3 children, you get a gold star. You actually get more legal freedom. Women who had 3 children were considered very honorable. They even had instances of male-male marriage notated in historical documents. It's possible some female-female relationships happened, not as certain, but we have actual documentation of men getting married to one another. Polygamy was not allowed. So you could basically, it seems, get married to who you'd like, could not have multiple marriages. Hello, folks. Adultery. This was a criminal act identified as sex between a male citizen and a married woman, or an unmarried daughter, or a married woman and any man. Legally, you could kill adulterers. This section is mostly something that was dealt with in private. If you felt like your daughter had been sullied or like your husband had betrayed you, that was something that was supposed to be dealt with in the family. These laws mostly had to do with the instances where someone killed somebody else because of adultery. There were certain things you were allowed to do. If your wife cheated on you and you killed the guy that she was with, legally you had to kill the wife too. You couldn't just kill the guy or else you would get in trouble. There was some legal issues there, but mostly it was something that you would handle yourself. Often, something we'll discuss in a little bit later, discussions of female homosexuality sometimes came up in reference to these scenes where a woman would be caught with another woman. Is that adultery? Was she penetrated? It comes up sometimes in discussions of female homosexuality. All right. Prostitution, totally legal for male and female prostitutes everywhere. There was also something called sacred prostitution, which would be related to specific religions. They would have like acts that they would perform and rituals, and there were different rules about what was allowed with sacred prostitutes versus what was allowed with just your general run-of-the-mill prostitute. Slaves were often prostitutes. Children could be sold into prostitution if you didn't want your kids. If you had an infant and you didn't want it, it was very common to do that. And men could basically have fun with prostitutes all the time. I do not think a married woman could. I didn't see any instance of it or anything forbidding it, but I feel like that was a no-no. Divorce was also possible at this time for the man or the woman, either way. And there was very little stigma attached to it. Like, it might be like, ooh, like titillating gossip for a little bit, but it wasn't like a mark of shame. And in fact, you could do it multiple times. Since relationships and marriage were really tied to business and to money, if a better deal came along, it was not that hard for a person to like step back and say, hey, cool. Especially also, you see some instances of divorce being a tool for a woman to gain independence, since if her father dies, her father no longer rules over her. Her husband has no legal control over her. If she divorces him, she's her own woman. Cool. The remarrying after death or divorce was also incredibly common. And again, it could happen between the man or the woman. There was no rule about women not being allowed to divorce. Contraception and abortion. These were known of at the time. There were some plants you were supposed to be able to eat. Success was iffy. Coitus interruptus, trying to pull out, also less successful. There are some descriptions of actual surgical procedures that may have been used for abortion. How successful they were, we don't know. But these were things that were known. More common was infanticide, which was if you had a baby you didn't want, you just leave it exposed to die, or you could sell it as a slave or as a sex slave or any of that. That was generally how you handled babies you didn't want, because abortion and contraception were probably not that successful. Hello, folks. Welcome. So that explains a lot of the major social standards of this society. We will get more to sex in just a second, but the general, what's allowed as far as marriage goes and divorce, having babies, these are what Rome would allow. That's going to be important when we discuss Judaism and Christianity, because especially Judaism, the exact opposite is okay in Judaism. They are completely against the Roman idea of what marriage and sex is. So what does Rome think about sex? Well, we discussed earlier the social hierarchy that influences Roman society. You know, your free men on the top and the women and the slaves and what have you. A lot of that idea of the social hierarchy was influenced by, we're going to get a little dirty now, folks, sex. Specifically, whoever was doing the penetrating. Your social status was considered more masculine so long as you were the one putting it in. So an adult man was expected to penetrate people that were less masculine than him. Women, effeminate boys, slaves, anybody that was considered less masculine, it was socially acceptable for you to penetrate them. And it would reinforce your masculinity and your Romanness. This is why women have a slightly lesser position in society. Not necessarily because they're women, but because they cannot naturally penetrate. Dildos and things were, of course, a known quantity, and they will come up. They had ideas of what we would term sexuality. Like, they had identities as a sexual being. And we know some of this because there were books of astrology which would discuss, like, if you were born under this sign, then you will be attracted to twinks. Like, if you were born under the sign of so-and-so, you will be an older woman that loves women. Like, this was an idea that they had. Their sexualities were not just determined by sex act or desire based on gender. It was also based on age, your legal freedom. Like, are you attracted to slaves or not? You know, it was a little more complicated by that social hierarchy that they lived in, where who you were attracted to was tied in very heavily to the social hierarchy and would define you as a person. Now, just because it was only socially acceptable to penetrate and it was less acceptable to be penetrated, that does not mean that everybody lined up and followed those rules. I mean, think about today. We don't all follow those rules. I just realized I missed one image here. That was Plato's Symposium. But anyway, let's get to the fun images. There's our gay dude. We'll discuss who he is in a minute. Just because it was the norm and was considered acceptable, by no way does that mean that that's what everybody did. In fact, we have proof that's not what everybody did. We will get to the proof. Any sexual act that didn't consider Roman norms, writers would call it the way of the Greeks. Like, that is such a Greek thing to do. Because, you know, Greece was a place that also was very sexually free in a lot of wild ways. And, of course, was an enemy of Rome. So it's always a normal thing among societies to be like, well, obviously anything we don't approve of is something that our enemy invented. So it's the way of Greece. Sex between adult women and sex between adult men was the way of the Greeks. That gets us to our next topic, which is pederasty. Probably something you've heard of, at least in passing. The Romans were known for this practice of having young boys enter sexual relationships with adult men. And that's something that's often been thrown about as, one, condemnation of Rome in general, and two, condemnation of homosexuality. That this very famous instance of homosexuality is so gross. Oh, children. Remember that young girls were marrying at 13 as well. This was just the age of adulthood in Rome. Yes, there was a focus on the idea that they were so young and effeminate, because they were, but it wasn't like it's not the same thing where it would be considered necessarily sexual attraction to children, the way that we would say something like, being attracted to a 13-year-old is sexual attraction to children. It's not the same thing. Pederasty is different, and it's the same kind of social situation a young woman would have found herself in, except it was marriage rather than this. Hello, Odd Molly. Welcome. Pederasty was basically, once you were like 13, 14, your family would arrange you to enter into a relationship with an adult man. Typically, the age difference was not that big. Of course, there were instances of big differences. But for the most part, it would have been like a 20, like a younger guy entering in with this relationship. And they would actually support the child in their education, their future, whatever it is they're doing, and basically introduce them to the world, you know. It was meant to end once the boy was mature and he was going to enter into a marriage or, you know, what have you. Did the relationships always work out this way? No, probably not. There were always going to be some various different ways that these relationships happened, but this was basically what most young people, especially in the higher elite classes, would have gone through once they reached the age of adulthood. You gotta remember, we have an understanding of childhood that even up to the 19th century, people just didn't have. There wasn't this understanding that kids are not fully mature and developed, and what happens to them can permanently damage their minds, their brains, their development. Like, that's not something that they understood or knew. And by the time you're 13, 14, you're hitting sexual puberty, your body's changing. To them, that's a physical sign that, oh, well, that's an adult today, you know? Like, and there was this sense of like, okay, well, now that you're an adult, it's time to get you out into the world. Time for you to either marry or enter into this, you know, adult partnership to lead to your future. It's not an evil thing, you have to remember. It's not like, oh, this old pervert's going to... It was how you grow up, you know? And it's hard for us with such a big difference, you know, in societal norms to look at that and go, oh. But there's a definite... There's a definite double standard where I don't see that kind of reaction at all to like child marriages with women. You know, for a long time, that's just kind of been like, oh, well, that just happened. Especially like in historical, like studying circles, people discussing history. You'll see a lot more people like, oh, pederasty, oh, but a young girl gets married at 14, and that was just the norm back then. It's hard to separate that out. I'm not saying it was okay. I'm saying it wasn't some kind of evil plan. It was how they understood life. It was how they understood childhood and all that. So, getting to actual terms for sexuality. Let's look at another fun... that's some fun Roman artwork. Yeah, that's... I'll just let you look and enjoy that, and then we'll... There we go, we'll move on to... this is the same dude that I showed you here. His name is Antinos. We will discuss him in a moment. But I just wanted to show y'all that beautiful image. Antinos will be a figure in a moment. So, they had a lot of terms for sexuality, which is part of what lets us know that, like, this was a sexual identity at the time. Erastus was a active male partner in a gay relationship, which meant lover. Eromenos was the passive gay partner, and that meant beloved. Delicatus would mean something like exquisite or dainty boy. Exoleti or exoletus was a male prostitute. The word meant to grow up or to grow old, and these male prostitutes were much older men, older than what was considered the norm for being penetrated, but who enjoyed penetration. So there was this, again, their sexualities are based on a lot on, like, age and gender and social status, so that there's a whole sexual identity for an older man that wants to take it up the butt. You know, like, that's the exoleti. Female terms include the Greek hetarista tribas dehataristra lesbia, the Latin tribus frictis, fricatrix, or virago. If you translate these terms, virago basically means something like masculine. Think about virile, virago. The other terms all basically are variations of the verb to rub. Which you'll find in many other cultures besides Roman and Greek. You will find that to rub is a way to identify women that love each other. The Greek homosexuality, they had this belief that, of course, you weren't supposed to penetrate, but this also, for the most part, wasn't legally, like, Like, there wasn't, like, a legal punishment if you wanted to get it up, you know, that wasn't a thing, for the most part, except for if you were a soldier. If you were a soldier on the front lines, you were supposed to keep it in check, and you were not supposed to have sex with each other. Of course it happened. Of course it did. Historically, it seems like adult male homosexuality was far more common in Rome than it was in Greece. For all that people get, like, really spooked by how gross some of, like, the age differences in Rome were, Greece was so much worse. Greece sexuality, they had a lot going on over there, and it's not my thing, and I don't know enough to tell you about it. I do know that in contrast, Rome was far more what we would consider civilized. So now we get to Antinos. Antinos was this young man here, the beloved of the emperor Hadrian, both in the sense that Hadrian loved him and in the sense that he was Hadrian's eromenos, his little beloved boy. He was, I think, 13 or 14 when he entered into the relationship. The emperor was 48. He's the emperor. He gets to do what he wants. Unfortunately, Antinos died before he was 20. We don't know exactly how he died. He was on a boat traveling with the emperor. They traveled together everywhere. I mean, the adventures these two must have gone on for the, like, 7 or 8 years they were together. Amazing. This guy was involved in a lot of the emperor's political movements and things, but not in the sense that he had any influence, which is part of why nobody thinks he was murdered. Antinos never influenced the emperor to do anything. He never seemed to use his, like, emperor powers, you know, like, he didn't kind of whisper in his ear, so it's unlikely he was murdered. It's also unlikely he killed himself because he was the beloved of the emperor. He had the world on a plate. Like, he could go everywhere and do anything. Like, why would he kill himself? A popular idea is that he actually sacrificed himself. Now, that's different from killing himself because there's this belief in Roman society that sacrifice to the gods does something. It means something. And especially, like, a life, that would be a very big thing. And there's a lot of, like, historical stories of that appearing in their various myths. Hadrian was much older at this point. He may have been ill, and it's possible that out of love for Hadrian, Antinos sacrificed himself, hoping that Hadrian would be cured. One of the reasons that this is kind of a popular idea is that Hadrian won't discuss in his written, like, diaries and works why Antinos died. Clearly he was there. If it was an accident, why wouldn't he say? But he won't say how he died, just he's so upset about it. So upset about it, he made him a god. Have you ever been so sad your twink died, you made him god? This man was. He deified Antinos. He had his own temple in his own city that was named for him, if I remember right. I mean, even after Hadrian died, this religion blew up. People worshipped Antinos all the time, and he was just a 19-year-old twink who happened to die young and was beloved by the emperor, and now we're all gonna call him a god. We're not supposed to be discussing Christianity yet, but I can't not read this for you. Clement of Alexandria, a very early Christian writer who would format and develop a lot of Christian thought. He had some thoughts about Antinos. Another new deity was added to the number with great religious pomp in Egypt, and nearby Greece as well, by the king of the Romans, who deified Antinos, whom he loved as Jupiter loved Ganymede, and whose beauty was extremely rare, for lust is not easy to restrain, being devoid of fear as it now is, and people observe the sacred nights of Antinos, the shameful nature of which the lover who spent them with him knew. Why count him among the gods, a boy honored because of impurity, and why should you expand upon his beauty? Beauty damaged by corruption is horrible. Now the grave of the prostituted boy is the temple of Antinos. The Greeks were not fond of this. Clement didn't like him, and they did not like Clement or the other Christians, but we will get to that. This is one of the things that kind of makes up my point, as we're going to be discussing in the future. For the Christians, homosexuality was associated with power and corruption. Not that there was likely anything wrong with Antinos. I don't know him. I don't know what he would like. But he was with the Emperor Hadrian, who by necessity is ruling conquered lands and taxing people to death and doing whatever he wants, and he's totally corrupt. None of these dudes were good dudes in the upper echelons of Roman society. And so for the early Christians writing about this society, homosexuality is the same as them as political corruption in Rome. They're the same thing. That's what they associated with. That's what Antinos is. Oh, a rich gay dies and now we have to worship him? You know, that's where a lot of that early anger is coming from. We will get to that. One last quick reading before we move on to female homosexuality. I've made the point a couple times that even though it was socially normal to only penetrate those that are more effeminate than you, that's not what was the case for everyone. Of course it wasn't. Lots of people had absolutely normal gay relationships between adults. And one example is a short line of poetry from Martial, a famous writer of the time, one of his epigrams. I'm going to read it in Latin because I just think it's so fun. Mentula cum doliet puero, tibi, ne viole, culus non sum divinus, sed sicio quid facias. With your boy's penis and your anus aching. Naviolus, I'm not a god, but I know what you're doing. He's writing to a contemporary of his time, an adult man, who he claims has an anus aching, which means he's saying, hey you, adult man, I know what you're doing. I know you're getting down. And he's basically marking him out and saying he's not having what's considered socially acceptable sex. But he's not condemning him for it. It's like a wink. He's like, I see what you're doing. I see your butt hurts. Like, this is just more proof that no society ever stays totally true to the sexual norms. Not even, you know, one like Rome where the norms were far more open. Now let's talk about female homosexuality. So we've discussed how the social hierarchy is based upon penetration. The idea that if you're being penetrated, you're somehow socially lesser. So what does that mean for female homosexuality? You know, for two women, if sexuality is defined by who you penetrate, then how do you define that? The ambiguity of this and the fact that it flies in the face of what's normal socially, where society defines your social power and status by your penetrating of others, immediately that makes female homosexuality dangerous, which is why you see a lot of writing at the time calling it disgusting and dangerous. Now, that's not the same as saying it was, say, illegal or you were going to be physically in danger as a lesbian. The biggest issues are probably going to be issues of adultery if you're a married woman. But like I said, it was pretty easy to divorce at the time, and if you wanted to divorce and do your own thing, that was kind of a possibility. But there are famous instances of male writers discussing these women and being like, oh, what does society come to? One famous one, again, the writer Martial, who wrote our fun little epigram, wrote about a woman named Philanius, a woman who was quite fierce with the erection of a husband, who participated in athletics, like handball and wrestling. She vomited and overate. She went out drinking late at night. And she said she did not engage in fellatio, as it was not manly enough, and preferred instead to, I quote, devour girls' middles. A shame! Where has society gone? Where has it gone? What has it come to? So it wasn't a crime, but it was socially unacceptable. But that didn't necessarily mean that these women were going to listen to anybody about it. Especially depending on what strata of society you were on, it was probably a lot easier to get away with it. If you didn't have to marry, say, for the family's honor, or if you got to the point where it was safe for you to divorce and you could do what you wanted. Legally, it was not illegal. You could do what you wanted. Adultery would be the big problem. There were a couple different, there's this one author that writes about pretend legal situations. You know, what would have happened if this legal situation happens, what would you do? Like writing to young lawyers trying to discuss these theoreticals. And one of the theoreticals was, what do you do if you find two people caught in the act of adultery, and one of them, is a woman, the married woman, and the other one's a woman? What's going on? He's described it basically saying, check to see if it's a man, if it's natural or sewn on. kind of implying, like, is this somebody, a woman, penetrating with an extra thing? Or is this actually a guy? It was well known back then. It was portraying women that were attracted to women. One of them would overtly be portrayed as masculine, as having a false penis or just a really ridiculously big clitoris. Unfortunately, we do have some historical text showing that sometimes clitorectomies were done in these situations, possibly by, again, fathers had legal control over their daughters, but that wasn't always the case. But that there is some instances where we know about this association of believing that women who liked women just had too big clits, and they would handle that medically, unfortunately. We're going to read a story from Ovid, which I really like, that involves kind of female love, but also trans identity, which is what we're shifting into. It is the story of Ianthe and Iphis, which is not one that Ovid invented. Is this where we're at? Yes, there it is. To explain, The Metamorphosis is an amazing book, and it involves quite a few different trans identities in it, because the entire thing is a collection of myths involved solely on the idea of transformation. And it shifts like this tapestry of artwork, moving from one myth to another. It covers more than 250 myths, tying them together and giving them this sense of history, this sense of chronological order, and tying them all into these gods and these figures that change. And multiple stories involve the transformation of genders. Ianthe and Iphis is a story that seems to be adapted from an older Greek story, since it's basically the same. He just changed some names around. It's really lovely. I'll let y'all see what you think, but some people have different thoughts about what his thoughts were here. In other writing, Ovid did say that he did not approve of female love, but let's listen to this. Rumor might very well have spread the news of this unprecedented transformation throughout the towns of Crete if they had not just had a wonder of their own to talk about, the change that came to Iphis. For once upon a time there lived in Phaestus, not far from the royal capital at Cronus, a freeborn plebeian named Lygdus, who was otherwise unknown and undistinguished, with no more property than fame or status, and yet devout and blameless in his life. His wife was pregnant. When her time had come, he gave her his instructions with these words: "There are 2 things I pray to heaven for, on your account, an easy birth and a son. The other fate is much too burdensome, for daughters need what fortune has denied us, a dowry. Therefore, and may God prevent this happening, but if by chance it does, and you should be delivered of a girl, unwillingly I order this, and beg pardon for my impiety, but let it die." Remember, leaving infants out to die was a totally normal thing, and it would have been expensive to have a daughter at that time. So the dad says, listen, harsh reality, but if it's a girl, we can't keep it. He spoke, and tears profusely bathed the cheeks of the instructor and instructed both. Telethusa continued to implore her husband, praying him not to confine their hopes so narrowly, to no avail, for he would not be moved from his decision. Now scarcely able to endure the weight of her womb's burden, as she lay in bed, at midnight a dream vision came to her. The goddess Io stood, or seemed to stand, before her troubled bed, accompanied with solemn pomp by all her mysteries. She wore her crescent horns upon her brow, and a garland made of gleaming sheaves of wheat, and a queenly diadem. Behind her stood the dog-faced god Anubis, and divine Bubastis, who defends the lives of cats, and Apis as a bull clothed in a hide of varied colors, with Harpocrates, the god whose fingers pressed against his lips command our silence, and one often sought by his devoted worshippers, Osiris, and the asp, so rich in sleep-inducing drops, she seemed to wake and saw them all quite clearly. So why is he showing up with some Egyptian gods to this woman's dream than he is Greeks? Why are Greeks or Romans not showing up? In the original story, in the Greek world, it was, I believe, I'll have to double check, but it was a Middle Eastern goddess, if I remember. He specifically chooses Egyptian. Egypt was known for its female romance. It was known for its female-female marriages. It was seen in that era as a place of, oh, well, that's the, women loving women, that's the way of the Egyptians. I think it's telling that he says it's Egyptian goddesses that answer her prayer. These were the words the goddess spoke to her. O Telethusa, faithful devotee, put off your heavy cares. Disobey your spouse and do not hesitate, when Lucina has lightened the burden of your labor, to raise this child, whatever it will be. I am the goddess who, when asked, delivers, and you will have no reason to complain the honors you have paid me were in vain. After instructing her, the goddess left. The Cretan woman rose up joyfully, lifted her hands up to the stars, and prayed that her dream vision would be ratified. Then going into labor, she brought forth a daughter, though her husband did not know it. The mother, with intention to deceive, told them to feed the boy. Deception prospered, since no one knew the truth except the nurse. The father thanked the gods and named the child for its grandfather, Iphis, since this name was given men and women both. His mother was pleased, for she could use it honestly. So from her pious lie, deception grew. She dressed it as a boy. Its face was such that whether boy or girl, it was a beauty. Meanwhile, the years went by, 13 of them. Your father, Iphis, has arranged for you a marriage to the golden-haired Ianthe, the daughter of a Cretan named Telestus, the maid most praised in Festus for her beauty. The two were similar in age and looks, and had been taught together from the first. First love came unexpected to both hearts and wounded them both equally, and yet their expectations were quite different. Ianthe could look forward to a time of wedding torches and wedding vows, and trusts that one whom she believes a man will be her man. Iphis, however, loves with hopeless desperation, which increases in strict proportion to its hopelessness, and burns a maiden for another maid. And scarcely holding back her tears, she cries, "Oh, what will be the end reserved for Iphis, gripped by a strange and monstrous passion known to no one else? If the gods had wished to spare me, they should have. If they wanted to destroy me, they should have given me a natural affliction. Cows do not burn for cows, nor mares for mares. The ram will have his sheep, the stag his doe, and birds will do the same when they assemble. There are no animals whose female lusts for other females. I wish that I were dead." You'll see now that this is a very, very common argument against homosexuality in the past that's brought up again and again and again. Animals don't do this. I don't think none of these people checked or had zoos. That Crete might bring forth monsters of all kinds. Queen Pasiphae was taken by a bull. Yet even that was male and female passion. My love is much less rational than hers, to tell the truth. At least she had the hope of satisfaction, taking in the bull through guile in the image of a cow, thereby deceiving the adulterer. If every form of ingenuity were gathered here from all around the world, if Daedalus flew back on waxen wings, what could he do? Could all his learned arts transform me from a girl into a boy? Or could you change into a boy, Ianthe? But really, Iphis, pull yourself together. Be firm, cast off this stultifying passion. Accept your birth unless you would deceive yourself as well as others. Look for love where it is proper, as a woman should. Hope both creates and nourishes such love. Reality deprives you of all hope. Notice he says earlier, could you change into a boy, Ianthe, saying, it would be socially acceptable if we were both boys, or if I was a boy and you were a girl. But if we're both girls, what do? I cannot penetrate you. That is the heart of what is considered normal sexuality. That's why she's so upset. No watchman keeps you from her dear embrace, no husband's ever vigilant concern, no father's fierceness, nor does she herself deny the gifts you would have from her. And yet you are both denied happiness, nor could it have been otherwise if all the gods and men had labored in your cause. But the gods have not denied me anything. Agreeably, they've given what they could. My father wishes for me what I wish. She and her father both would have it be. But nature, much more powerful than they, wishes it not. Sole source of all my woe. Nature, the source of all our woe, it can't be controlled. Going back to that idea that the gods are just natural forces that are out of our reach. But look, the sun has risen, and the day of our longed-for nuptials how dawns at last. Ianthe will be mine, and yet not mine. We die of thirst here at the fountainside. Why do you, Juno, guardian of brides, and you, O Hymen, god of marriage, come to these rites which cannot be rites at all? for no one takes the bride, and both are veiled. She said no more, nor did her chosen burn less fiercely as she prayed, you swiftly come, O god of marriage. Fearing what you sought, Telethusa postponed the marriage day with one concocted pretext and another, a fictive illness or an evil omen. But now she had no more excuses left, and the wedding day was only one day off. She tears the hairbands from her daughter's head, and with her own thus unbound, she prayed, while desperately clinging to the altar. O holy Isis, who art pleased to dwell and be worshipped at Paratonium, at Pharos in the Meroitic fields where the Nile splits into 7 branches, deliver us, I pray you, from our fear. For I once saw thee and thy sacred emblems, O goddess, and I recognized them all, and listened to the sound of brazen rattles, and kept your orders in my memory. And that my daughter still looks on the light, that I have not suffered punishment, why, this is all your counsel and your gift. Now spare us both, and offer us your aid. Warm tears were in attendance on her words. The altar of the goddess seemed to move. It did move, and the temple doors were shaken, and the horns, her lunar emblem, glowed with light, and the bronze rattles sounded. Not yet secure, but nonetheless delighted by this omen, the mother left with Iphis following. Oh, that's not the right image. Here we go. There we go. As was her wont, but now with longer strides, darker complexion, with greater force, a keener consonance, and with her hair shorter than usual and unadorned, and with more vigor than a woman has. And you who were so recently a girl are now a boy. Bring gifts to the goddess. Boldly celebrate your faith in her. They bring the goddess gifts and add to them a votive tablet with these lines inscribed. Gifts Iphis promised when she was a maid, transformed into a boy, he gladly paid. The next day's sun revealed the great wide world, with Venus, Juno, and Hymen all together, gathered beneath the smoking nuptial torches, and Iphis in possession of Ianthe. There's discussions about what this story means about how the Romans think about homosexuality. And on one point, I think it is fair that it does devalue the love between two women that doesn't involve penetration. If penetration is involved, such as with a dildo or what have you, then it's considered more socially acceptable. But even then, it's still considered abnormal, not because it's two women, but because it's two people incapable of penetration. The same kind of idea would be present if it was like a eunuch or, someone that cannot penetrate. That's just so much considered part of sexuality that somebody's got to be able to do it. On the other hand, he doesn't invalidate their actual love for each other. He gives them a happy ending, a kind of transgender happy ending where Ianthe gets to be a boy. Ianthe has lived their whole life as a boy and just never seen the actual physical difference as a problem until he's got to put out on the marriage night. And now is like, if only, what Ianthe wants is to be changed. And it happens. I really found that to be one of my favorite stories. It's not the only one in here that deals with those themes. Tiresias is another big one. Tiresias became a symbol of the division between man and the divine, between female and male. He spends 7 years as a woman, gets pregnant, has kids, gets married, and then is turned back again. And it becomes this kind of symbol of the in-between. Let's jump down to more issues of transgender identity. The identity of your gender being so tied to your social hierarchy and your legal status meant that things like cross-dressing had a legal effect. It could be dangerous. You couldn't just do that. But at the same time, there was a lot of socially acceptable transgender identities that you could involve yourself in if that was what you wanted. Almost all of them were either prostitution or religion. There were multiple very powerful religious sects that were tied heavily to ideas of crossing gender lines. One of the most famous was the priests of Cybele. Let's see if we got our image here of her. No, this is one of the priests. Cybele, or Cybele, I'm not sure which way it's said, was a Middle Eastern somewhere kind of goddess involved with a male character named Attis. There's a lot of variations on the story, but basically Attis at one point is overwhelmed by Cybele's godliness and goes crazy and cuts his dick off. He dies, and either his body is preserved or he is resurrected. And he is part of that kind of tradition of the harvest god that dies and comes back, with the added on gender discussions that come from the fact that he cut his dick off. And in some stories, he is actually the child of someone who was a hermaphrodite. It varies. So the priests of Cybele, like this picture here, and also I believe this next one, yes, that also, were all castrated. They all, like, this was not even legal at the time originally, and then the emperors were like, okay, cool, yeah, y'all can do that. They would castrate themselves and dress in women's clothing, and all the literature about them would refer to them in the female term. They would grow out their hair and bleach it really blonde. They would wear a lot of really beautiful jewelry and long dresses. And they were involved in a lot of really, really intricate rituals, festivals, dancing, a lot of variations. There was I believe it was a Feast of Blood that was involved in the actual initiation process, you know, where you and all that. There's a story mentioning them from an old Greek text where there's this instance of a lion attacking a priest of Cybele who escapes. The lines go, "Goaded by the fury of the dreadful goddess, tossing his locks in wild frenzy, clothed in women's raiment with well-plaited tresses and a dainty netted hair caul, a eunuch once took shelter in a mountain cavern, driven by the numbing snow of Zeus. But behind him rushed in a lion, a slayer of bulls, returning to his den in the evening, who basically, you know, I'm gonna eat you." And in the end it says, let's see. "The priest, startled by the deep voice, felt all his stirred spirit broken in his breast, yet he uttered from his lips the piercing shriek they use, and tossed his whirling locks, and holding up his great tambour, revolving the instrument of Olympian Rhea, he beat it, and it was the savior of his life. For the lion, hearing the unaccustomed hollow boom, ran away." This kind of tying into the way that they would look in their performances, like wild with their hair going and they're playing the music and shouting, like very powerful image of what they were like. Another very famous group was one we've mentioned in a previous video, bearded Aphrodite or Aphroditus, sometimes associated with Hermaphroditus or the hermaphrodite, who in Greek stories was the son of Hermes and Aphrodite. His myth involves the explanation for why some people are born intersex. Sometimes his character was associated with the bearded Aphrodite. Sometimes the bearded Aphrodite was their own thing. It was a tradition of worshiping the goddess, the goddess Aphrodite, goddess of love, as a transgender figure, someone that had a beard and female clothing, and often was holding up their clothes to reveal, ta-da! They were mostly, I believe, they were centered in Crete, eventually moving into the Roman Empire, becoming something in Rome. There was a couple different quotes here of them. A writer in around 200 saying, "The torches give a faint light, enough for revelers to see what is close in front of them, but not enough for us to see them. Peals of laughter rise, and the women rush along with men, wearing man's sandals, and garments girt in strange fashion. For the revel permits women to masquerade as men, and men to put on women's garb and ape the walk of women." Bearded Aphrodite's festivals allowed everybody to cross-dress, which, of course, was not normally legal. There's a statue of Venus on Cyprus, that's where it was, not Crete, that's bearded, shaped, and dressed like a woman with scepter and male genitals, and they conceive her as both male and female. Aristophanes calls her Aphroditus, and Lavius says, "Worshipping then the nurturing god Venus, whether she is male or female, just as the moon is a nurturing goddess. In his Attis Polochorus too states, she is in the moon, and men sacrifice to her in women's dress, women in men's, because she is both male and female." There's one more reading here. I don't think I've got the lungs to read it myself. Carmen 68 is a description of an actual reading of the holy rites of the Sibyl cult and what they would do. I think my voice is giving out, so I will have to skip that one, but it is in the description if you're interested in reading it. There was a lot of variety in the culture at the time, even if it's not something we necessarily hear about, especially when you consider like the idea of Rome in the modern age. I picture from the old movies and stuff like stuffy old British guys like, oh yes, we're going to conquer and kill that Jesus fella, and nothing gay or trans or anything about it. They had a very complex society, and that complexity is going to be what the Jews and the Christians are responding to in this era when they are discussing, how they feel about the fact that they've been conquered. I mean, Rome is forcing themselves on all these other cultures, and it's especially problematic for Judea because their way of life is so different. A lot of other cultures could kind of assimilate and work together with Rome. The Jews couldn't. It just did not work for them, and unfortunately would lead to a lot of tragedy, including what goes on with Jesus. Tomorrow we will continue and explore the Jewish perspective of this time period, and what their ways were like, what their genders and sexualities were like, why they kept butting heads with the Romans, why it would not work out. And from there we'll move into the early history of Jesus and what was going on in his period of history that led to the whole thing with him and the Gospels and all that exploding into a religion. I think that's what we'll cover this week, and next week we'll actually work into how after his death in the next 100 years it became a church and then a government and then all that moving forward. Thank you guys for joining me. This was so much fun. We'll continue to do this kind of like a discussion through the topics, some readings from some first kind of resources, some discussions of real queers from the past. I hope you continue to enjoy it. This is a lovely time of year, and I know that this kind of history, growing up, I felt like where did we all come from, and why does God hate me? And I don't want anybody to feel like that. God does not hate you. God loves gays, and we've always been here. And I hope you will continue to enjoy this. Tomorrow's going to be great. Judaism is amazing. Sneak peek, they've always had transgender people. They have 6 genders. It's amazing. So yeah, that will be tomorrow. Thanks again. If you like what I do and you want to support it, consider donating or buying my books. Links are in the description to my store. Also links to all the readings we did today if you want to check those out. And I will see you next time. Bye.